Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we are delighted to have Marshall Karp with us. He's talking about his new book, Don't Tell Me How to Die. Wonderful title. And we have signed copies available, and I will go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to go ahead and purchase one. We don't have that many left. And also, if you have questions for Marshall, go ahead and put them in the comments or a chat feature, and I'll be happy to ask any questions you might have. So, Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Now, you will know that the Poison Pen probably doesn't have two guitars hanging on the walls in Patrick's office. So, Patrick is bravely rallying from being homesick in order to do the program with us. But, Patrick, tell us about your guitars for a minute. Those are really cool. I don't remember seeing them.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, this one is a resonator guitar, and the one behind it is a jazz master.
Wow. Good for you. Marshall,
Yeah.
Patrick tends to geek out talking to John Sanford and Jonathan Kellerman and authors who are really into guitars. So it's kind of fun to see that.
Okay, I'm not, but I could be if sucking up to you helps, Patrick.
No, not sucking up. I'm just interested to see, see them. Anyway, here we are. And we're going to talk about a book that I have to say I rarely reread things, but some of the dialogue and some of the passages in this book are so good that I actually had a good time going back over them. Now, many of you who've watched these programs or met me at the bookstore will know that I have said for years, practically my whole life, that I read for voice. If what I'm reading, if the voice doesn't interest me, then no matter how good the plot is or whatever, I just don't care. And I think you can sort of liken that to, walking into a cocktail party or something, and there's some people there you meet, you're really happy to talk to. Some people, they're just boring. So, Marshall, this is an incredible voice. And I looked in the back of the book in the useful author afterward, where you said that the voice of Maggie has really been, or the character has been with you for a long time.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I write a book in about a year and a half, and then about 7 years ago, this woman came in my head, and as soon as she started talking to me, I fell in love with her. And she had an interesting story, which is the premise. She's 43. She's happily married, great husband, great kids, great job, great future. But she's diagnosed with the same fatal disease that killed her mother at 43. And having seen what happens when her mother died and her father was suddenly single, and the and women circled him like sharks on a feeding frenzy, most of them with casseroles. And one of these women ruined his life and and his two daughters. And Maggie says, "Listen, I'm dying, but I'm not letting anybody come in and just take my husband. He's an idiot. He's a man. He's gonna, I'm finding my replacement before I die, and I have 3 months to do it." And I go, that's incredible. You should find a woman to write this. And it's sort of like, hey, dummy, I am in your head. I can't. So I love that you said the voice because, spoiler alert, I did not grow up as a teenage girl. And if you looked in the back of the book, I talked to the first 50 women asking them what they would do if they were in Maggie's place. And then at least another 50 as I wrote 7 drafts to get to so that it felt like Maggie's voice. It was in me, but I didn't know how to express it. And then um, I love that you said that because that's what I was striving for, to be Maggie, not to be Marshall. And it was funny. I was doing one of these YouTube things, and somebody in the chat said, "Well, he's a man. What right does he have to like write like a woman?" And somebody wrote back in the chat, "Hate to spoil it for you, but Bram Stoker wasn't really a vampire." So the fact
That's
that
what
I was I the fact that I was able to find her voice, um, it means the world to me. This book, I've written books, I've had bestsellers, but this is the hill I was willing to die on. This is the book I wanted to finish. And everything you said just is like, wow, I wrote this for Barbara. She reread it. Shut up.
Okay, but now there's some confusion here because I love Maggie and she is the center of this book, the narrator going all the way through. But the person I think is most remarkable in this book is not Maggie, but her mother. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that Kate is, and if Kate hadn't been Kate,
Yes.
then Maggie could not possibly exist as she is. Now, when we meet the book, Kate is the one who has learned that she is dying of a rare blood disease. And she's been through the Hail Mary, she's been through the regular treatment. She's been to a kind of Hail Mary finale. And she sits her daughters down one afternoon by Magic Lake, which is a
Magic Pond
Magic
picnic.
Pond,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Right.
No, that's okay.
Okay. Magic
Close enough.
Pond. In Hearthstone, where this book takes place, and lets her daughters know that there's nothing left. The Hail Mary hadn't worked. That she wishes instead of having all the medical treatment, that she had spent more time with her daughters. But the thing she wants them to really consider is what will happen to their father when she's gone, because they've been together since high school, Kate and Finn. And this is a universal truth almost that I know it doesn't just apply here, but most people have been happily married for a long time when they're widowed, have a really hard time staying single. I mean, that's just not, the life pattern that they are used to. And so Kate rightly thinks that Finn will be completely lost and therefore
Exactly.
prey to all kinds of women who, as Marshall said, will show up with helpful casseroles, often in Le Creuset, so they have to come and retrieve it. Hello there. This is my puppy has just arrived, one of them. And so basically kind of a, predatory in a nice way, maybe for a small town.
Some of them well-intentioned,
Yeah.
obviously, but one obviously not well-intentioned. I mean, I really do. It's so funny because right now I am trying to I'm working on a film version of this, and I am right in the middle of Maggie telling her daughters. And I was also working on a book club, reader questions, a discussion, you know what they call it, right? A reader guide. And a lot has come up with is is Kate, Maggie's mother, pushing her daughters too hard to watch out for their dad? Is it too much burden? How much did Maggie learn from her mother? How much is she still living out um, what she couldn't do as a 17-year-old, as a girl? And as Mother's Day was approaching, so many people, I've gotten emails from people I know. I'm reading this book with my mother, and she is on chapter 9, and she's bawling her eyes out, which is the motorcycle ride where
Right.
I cried writing it.
I'll
I
bet.
cried listening to January Lavoie do the audio, and and there's a lot of mother-daughter stuff going on in here, and it's been positioned as a domestic thriller because I've written a bunch of thrillers, but it turned out to be Maggie's story. It turned out to be this family drama. And then, of course, I give it a few twists and try to make it interesting. And it, when I had the concept, I knew I had to have an ending that would that would satisfy people. And I hope you
The singer
agree.
of an ending,
Yeah,
regrettable. We can't actually discuss it,
no, we can't.
but it's great. I do think, and I will say that the funeral, the whole last days of Kate's life are really just gut-wrenching, but beautiful. It's wonderful to read them. But I think what Kate is thinking, I mean, you wrote her, but I get to figure out what
No,
I think she is.
go ahead.
Understands that because her daughters are young, if their father makes an unfortunate decision, that it will affect them, not just him, but it will seriously affect them. So in a way, she's kind of saying to them, you know, pay attention. A good person may come along. It may improve your life when I'm gone. Or if it's not the right person, it can not only make your father's life miserable, but derail yours. So, of course, having done that, Marshall, you set us up for the idea that among all the people bearing casseroles or, coming around Finn, there is going to be, in fact, one of those predators. I mean, it's gonna happen. And I love the way you set it up, the way the woman kind of comes into Finn's life, and um,
Yeah.
it goes from there.
She
And
sit she sits down at his bar and she orders two Manhattans and she drinks one and she leaves the other one. He comes over and says, "Well, no, that's for my late husband." And she's working him. And suddenly there's that kinship. Oh, she's recently widowed. I'm recently widowed. But there are a few things that Maggie's, as long as we're talking about Kate, that Maggie's mother says to the kids. She says, "Look, you're going to move on with your life. Your dad's not going to move on that far. We're we're both 43. He had planned, we planned this, we planned, and then all of a sudden, everything we had planned is not going to happen." And you also said something about when people who have been married a long time. There's a part in the book where um, the daughters say, "Dad, we'll go to a movie with you. We'll do this with you. We'll do this with you." And he says, "You don't understand. I have people that want to go bowling with me. I have people that want to go to the movies with me. But without your mother, I don't have anybody to sit and do nothing with me."
I think
And
that was a really
yeah.
telling. I mean, obviously, I won't inquire into your personal life, but it sounds as though you've had a long-term and very congenial
Oh,
marriage.
I think my wife is watching, and if you ask how many, you can ask her two questions. How long are you married? You'll get a big, large number,
Okay.
55.
Very,
And if you say, and I was 12, and if you say, how many years have you been happily married? She'll go, 6, day here, day there, it adds up. But yeah, long-term marriages evolve into different relationships, but you're always there. And Finn without Kate is a lost man, and he's easy prey. And by the way, you talked about the Le Creuset. I'm not that sophisticated, so I said they came over with Tupperware casseroles, but the sisters take the stuff out of the Tupperware and put it in their own stuff and rinse out the Tupperware and give it back to the woman before she leaves, so that no reason to come back, lady.
yes, no, I thought that was a very good touch. So, Maggie and her sister, who have a really great relationship, and it continues throughout the book, are united in trying to look after their dad. And of course, their mother said a true thing to them. You've already mentioned that she said that the life that Kate and Finn had planned is over. But that doesn't mean that the girls' lives, which are just beginning to unfold, are over. And so it's a different effect for him and for them. But anyway, that is prelude to a larger story in the book. That the whole book is not about Kate dying. It's about what happens afterward. And it's clear from the funeral and from the events that preceded that the whole town was very much invested in Finn and Kate. He owns an Irish pub. Um, it's a kind of a town center. Um, Maggie wants to be a lawyer, she thinks, and her sister wants to be a doctor. So you'd think they were both Jewish, but no.
Okay, so some of that crept in.
Right, not Irish, but still. They both have ambitious plans. They're not that far from New York. They want to go to Penn, if I remember.
Right.
And so their
Yes.
lives are going to go on. But meanwhile, Maggie, there's a terrible incident that occurs in their neighborhood, which is um, a real estate predators in this book, has tried to um, sabotage and then take over an apartment house complex, a new complex, by trashing a dry cleaning establishment, going on a campaign that everything is toxic and whatever. And eventually, this drives a neighbor across the street to a family homicide, which is an awful thing. But the daughter has been out with Maggie and survives. Um, and so that trauma is really awful. So Maggie's thing is sex. I mean,
Well,
she likes
let's
drugs and she does drink, but she's really enthusiastic about sex.
let's talk about that for a minute. And it took a long time to think, what makes Maggie tick? And where I finally netted out is when she was 17, her mother died. And the doctors told her this is a rare blood disease and it's hereditary. And when we first meet Maggie in the first chapter, she's getting a blood test because she has to get a blood test 3 times a year, she and her sister, to make sure this killer HLH is not in her system. And in the first chapter, when she's getting the blood test, the phlebotomist shows up at her office, not for the blood test, but for a retest. Well, I just gave you blood 3 days ago. I know, but the doctor said the lab screwed up. And Maggie's going, no, I'm married to a doctor. The lab didn't screw up. I know medical malarkey when I hear it. You just got bad news and you're double checking. So Maggie has been living with this over her head since she's 17. And she was an A student. She was president of her class. She was church going. She got a little bit reckless once she knew that she had a ticking clock. And that kind of doesn't excuse some of her behavior. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to like love Maggie, and sometimes you're going to get frustrated with her decisions. But look, she's a firstborn. And on behalf of all firstborns, um, we are a bit of well, my wife's nickname for me is Mike, last name row manager. Okay, so it's like Maggie is an obsessive compulsive control freak, but she gets a lot done. So yeah, she goes off the rails a couple of times, but she's so well intentioned, and sex and a few other things are part of her warts. I'd go with. How
Yeah,
about that?
well, I mean, she's capable of reckless behavior, but at the same time, she's very tough. She has a lot of discipline and she's trained in the law. So, she's a great character. The way you tell this story is not a straightforward narrative. I mean, because, we meet him and then there's a prologue, like before the funeral, so forth. So we do learn a lot of this story and kind of, you know,
The first chapter, um, the timeline is 3 months before the funeral, and
right,
it's present time. And this is when the phlebotomist shows up at Maggie's office, and Maggie already knows, even before the doctor tells her, and the doctor will tell her, that she has 3 months to live. But then we will jump to 26 years
right.
before the funeral. And then at one point, we will jump to the day of the funeral when her kids are getting ready to get in the car and go to the cemetery. And it jumps all around. And I think, like film, people are used to timelines moving. And I've gotten a lot of feedback that people really enjoy seeing Maggie as a kid, seeing her as an adult, seeing her in the middle when she meets her husband. And knock wood, the timeline's not confusing.
No, it's
It,
not
it, it,
confusing at
it-
all.
yeah, cool.
I like that. And yeah, it is interesting to meet her and then go back and then, these various incidents. I mean, there were two horrific incidents, when she was young. One, the loss of her mother about the blood disease, and then two, the family
Her friend,
across the street and the terrible thing that happened. So, many people would never really get over either of those things. They'd be in a kind of a permanent state of PTSD or something, but Maggie is able to march forward. There's a lot of this all sounds really kind of heavy and sad, but actually it's not at all. The voice is fabulous and the constant wisecracking. I mean, Maggie really has a mouth on her.
and Lizzie is very funny, her
Yeah.
sister. And I think sometimes control freaks are control freaks. It sounds, they try to manage the world because it was so unmanageable at one time. Um, I, well, I won't go into any personal stories, but
Okay.
you know, you know, it's this is good fodder for me as I'm preparing the reader guides. What resonates with people? What, beyond the obvious, the thrill part, beyond the story. How does this resonate in your life? Do you know any people who are like Maggie, who want to control everything? Do you know any women who are looking around, and as soon as a guy becomes single, however, they're out there? There's a lot of reality, although every single woman that I asked, if you were in Maggie's shoes, what would you do? Not one of them said I would spend the next 3 months looking for my husband's next wife. Some of the funnier ones were, well, I guess I'd finally have to give him my passwords. And the other one, oh, she said, oh, they're gonna pounce all over Michael. I said, yeah, that's the point. She said, well, I'd go out and get an STD and then let's see if that guy ever got laid. And then she swears she never said that. But nobody thinks like Maggie, and I think that's part of her charm. She's not a character that you've met before.
No, she
And
absolutely isn't. But her approach to the idea that she should get her kids and help prepare her husband, for a new wife and all comes from her mother. I
yeah,
mean, her mother, I thought, was incredibly um, had great foresight, a great sense of reality, and also her mother was entirely secure in the relationship that she had. She was not um, nothing in that she says indicates that if Finn takes a new wife, it will in any way have diminished the relationship that she and Finn had.
she's a realist. She wants Finn to, he's 43. He
Mhm.
should have another life, but you have to help him through the transition because he's going to be extremely vulnerable in the beginning. So
Right.
yeah.
And it turns out, as we get to see in the book, that he was extremely vulnerable. And so,
And,
what were the
and
kids going to do about it? That's one part of the story. But then, Maggie eventually goes to college, gets her law degree.
becomes a lawyer and helps out someone from high school. She goes out on a limb. The character of Johnny Rollo, who's kind of a high school lowlife in the beginning, and then Maggie saves him from 10 to 15, 7 to 10 in jail, and he reforms, and has become one of my favorite characters. And I know a lot of people like. He's a bad boy who is lovable. I mean, I want Kieran Culkin to play him in the movie. He's just that bad boy that you just love because he's got a heart of gold, and he's so indebted to her that he's willing to help her when she needs help. And at this point in her life, she does need help. Um, and I, I'm a character writer, and I I think in terms of, not the plot has to be interesting, but I learned when I was in the television business why some television shows are successful and others are not. Why do people keep watching Mary Tyler Moore? Why do they keep watching Cheers? Why do they keep watching Seinfeld or The Office? Why do they go back, or Lucy? Why do they keep going back to the same show over and over? And the answer is because they love the predictable emotional experience they get from spending time with those people. They want to be with those people over and over. And if you read the book again, knowing the plot, I think that I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm saying you wanted to be with those characters again.
Well, I
And
think that's absolutely true, Marshall, but the word predictable applied to this book. Forget it. There is
oh,
nothing in this
oh
book.
no, that's the first time around. But no, I mean
Right.
the 15th episode of. Yeah. Oh
No,
no,
I
you want
understand.
but you went back knowing what you were going to get, and you were okay with that.
Yes, because the thing is, if you read as fast as I do, there's always
Mm.
going to be things you miss. I mean, slow readers have an advantage in that they get to savor parts of books that I really don't. But I go
Yeah.
flying through them so
Slow,
fast.
slow reading is highly overrated. I drag my knuckles, I drool, my mouth. I'm a terrible reader. I read, but I mostly listen on audio because that's easier.
Sure. Any way you want to
Well,
experience the story, I think
yeah.
is fine. But one of the charms of this book, despite what you may be gleaning from this conversation, is that not anything in it is predictable.
Well, you can say that, and I agree. I'm in violent agreement, Barbara.
Good. Right. So, but I do think, again, and it's not just Maggie's voice. All of the characters have really terrific voices. The father does, Kate, the mother does, the sister Lizzie does, the sweet librarian Beth does. Johnny Rollo, he's a terrific character. And yet, these are people who are not in any way saints. I mean, there's drugs in play, there's alcohol in play, there's sex in play. None of it excessive. Violence is not on the screen. I mean, it's not a cozy, but it's certainly, a raw kind of a thriller. In fact, there isn't really any way to qualify this book. It's not to call it a
How,
domestic thriller doesn't really. Uh,
how about must read? Is that a good?
yeah, no, I do. I mean,
I,
I hate the idea. It just came up today because we had a book release party for a romance author for Emily Henry, and it was interesting because we had like 30 people, and I asked them all why they were there, why they read Emily Henry, and what their earlier experiences were. And it was really fascinating. But our conclusion was that sticking to some kind of genre, particularly when you're young, is a mistake, because I mean, they were all over the place. Some of them read Nancy Drew, some of them it was Harry Potter, some of them it was Twilight, you know, um, all of these different reading experiences. And when you're a kid, you never ask, what genre is this? Is this a romance? Is this a fantasy? And all no, kids can enter into other worlds and imagine themselves in other worlds. I mean, I'm a child of the Oz books. That was my thing when I was very young. And it's only when we get older and tend to go into a lane, partly because our reading time may be restricted. And we want to have a good use of our time. That was something that came up. And I really can relate to that. If your leisure time for reading is relatively small, then it's like a dopamine hit. You want to read something that is going to be worth the time you expended. Hence, for these people, it was Emily Henry. I thought it was fascinating.
I think one of the reasons, I don't know, one of the reasons a lot of people, I don't know if I write short chapters. I'm aware of the concept of how much time do I have to read. And I try to get, I could write 1,000 word chapter, um, and, and set it up and end it with a button that makes you want to turn to the next chapter. And people like short chapters because short chapters are much more like movies. And these days on TikTok and Instagram, how long do you think people watch a video before they click to the next one?
Well,
It's
my experience with, and I have a very limited experience because I have no personal social media at all, but I do Instagram for the bookstore. And occasionally when I get an Instagram reel, they don't stay on anything long enough for me to pay any attention to it. It's that they go click, 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 click. And, the message they're trying to get across to me is like, why am I wasting my time here? Because nothing is meaningful when it's on screen for like 10 seconds before 10 best places to go in London. I mean, you can't even absorb what they are. Of course, maybe part of that is to make you watch the reel over and over again to try to figure it out. I mean, that may be part of the strategy there is that, you increase the number of plays, but I find it just infuriating.
I'm learning, and I think that a lot of the stuff I do on Instagram and on TikTok is not sell the book. I have a passion for helping writers who want to write, and I encourage them. And sometimes I just do a short video um, encouraging people to write. Where I just did one the other day telling the story of a writer who was so frustrated with her work, she just threw it out the window back in the day when there was no copy. It was like she threw the entire manuscript out the hotel window all over Park Avenue, and she's calling her editors. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. And he says, get your ass downstairs and pick up every single page. And she did. And her name was Harper Lee, and the book was To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's a true story. Writers get discouraged. There's a great line that somebody wrote years ago on back in the Twitter days. The give a man a fish. Give someone a book and they will read for a day. Teach someone to write a book and they will experience a lifetime of paralyzing self-doubt. So I love writers and I love encouraging them because I, I wanted to write one book. And by the way, I think I wrote yours was that I happened to be in Scottsdale the day that my first book, The Rabbit Factory, came out. And I was in your store. And when we were walking in, I was going to ask, do you have The Rabbit Factory by Marshall Karp? And my wife said, don't be an asshole. Which is one of the things that hold us together, her being able to say that and me being able to say, try to think of me as a recovering asshole. Okay. I'm working at it. But I don't know. I want to help. I want to help writers and I'm happy to. And so a lot of times I just talk about that. The bottom line is I don't know how Instagram works. I don't know how to find the tipping point, but I know there's been incredible traction on this book. It didn't when I wrote books for James Patterson, be number one with a bullet, New York Times bestseller list the first week. Yeah, because the Patterson empire is a machine. But when I wrote this, I knew it would grow, and it has. And I'm looking forward to book clubs. I'm in your collectors club, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
For June, right. This is a book that our crime club will be getting from us in June. And again, it's because of the voice. But let me also say that there's I can't remember how it all goes, but anyway, whatever, Mozart was premiering a symphony or playing a symphony for his patron, probably in Vienna. And the patron said, too many notes, Mr. Mozart. And so you would never say that to Mozart, right? It was the right number of notes. But for some people listening, maybe for the emperor or whatever it was too many notes. And I do think one of the charms of this book is that there are just exactly enough notes. There are enough words. He doesn't draw it out too much, but he doesn't cut it short too much. I am not actually addicted to short chapters. I mean, I'm not a Patterson reader particularly because there's just not quite enough there for me. But I also don't like things being drawn out to the point where, too many notes, Mr. Mozart comes in. I do think that one of the charms of this book is the pacing. I think you got it exactly right for this story.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you would have read the first draft, you wouldn't have said that.
Well, but I'm not supposed to read the first draft.
No. You know what Anne Lamott says. Just write the first. It can be total crap, but then you have something to work with. And I kept writing and rewriting and reorganizing. And even now, as I'm trying to figure out how to turn this into broadcast,
Right.
I'm finding, I worked in TV, and TV is different from a book. The stakes are higher. You have more opportunity for characters to do things that, quickly that they can't do in the book. And so I've had, now that I know who Maggie is and I know what the world is around her, and I can jump back and forth. I don't need a show. I can jump from here to there, and it works in film, and it's exciting. So thank you. Pace is, um, pace is a huge part of writing and learning how to pace the book so that your audience doesn't go, by the way, speaking of pace, I'm talking too much now, so you say something.
Well, I was going to ask you, when doing a film, can this story structure where you're moving back and forth over quite a lot of time, can you do that in film as convincingly? Or do you
Oh,
need to
yeah.
tell the story more in a more linear fashion?
Nope. I think, first of all, you need a great director, you need a great showrunner, but absolutely, I think that audiences know how to adjust to the back and forth. Uh, um, I'm thinking of the show This Is Us, where they were the grown triplets, and three of them, and then they were the teenage triplets, and it moved rather seamlessly, and you liked the characters twice. You liked them as and you got to see the difference. You got to see the maturity or the lack of maturity. So I think film is a friendly medium for time shifting.
Okay. That's interesting to have you say that. So the age range for an actor playing Maggie is not that huge. 17 to
Well,
what, 43?
I would have two actors. I would have two actresses. I think Finn, who's 43 and then 65. That's easy. Um, but I don't look. That'd be a high class problem for me to sit down with the director and the producer and Mr. Netflix and say, look, guys, um, look, Lee Child was happy to have uh, Tom Cruise play Jack Reacher. There are things that Jack Reacher is 6'5" in the book, and he's Tom Cruise in the film, and it works. So there's lots of compromises that are made along the way. And when you're talking about the Mozart notes, there's a really terrific book that's unavailable, but it's notes given by um, Hollywood executives to writers on their scripts. And the title of the book is "A Martian Would Never Say That." And that's the kind of
Wonderful
note.
title. I like
That's the kind that you could probably, I don't know if it's out of print, but it's so funny because it's real.
Yeah, but that's an absolutely super title.
Yeah.
So to sum this up, what we have here are characters that we really like and great pacing, and the whole book is really written to set up the last page. So, in many ways, it really is. So, as I said,
Oh,
you have to read it through, but
I I want to go to a book club meeting where I can talk about the last page. But
exactly.
I
Or
want
not.
to, I'm not in a book club,
No,
but
we can't do that.
I really, oh, a woman I work with at the publisher called me, texted me on a Friday night about a month ago, and she said, I am with my book club. Can we FaceTime you? And I go, I don't know, how much wine have you had? And it's like, by the way, the woman who called, she texted, she's pregnant, so she's not drinking wine. But it was so much fun to be able to talk to these people who had read the book. And you don't have to like zip it up for spoilers.
I know.
Oh,
That's
so,
why
so
it's
if
extremely difficult to discuss a book when it first
uh,
comes out
I know.
because you
I
have
want. If I get invited to a book club, I'm go. Well, I can go virtually. That's the thing when you do events like this, you're talking to people who haven't read it yet. You're trying to get them interested. But I really want to be there, and I have been to book clubs where they've read the book oh my God, and it's so much fun. And they asked, motivation, and they could talk. And oh, I remember I did a lot of book clubs for the Rabbit Factory, and oh, the questions, and just a lot of fun.
Well,
I
they are
love.
a lot of fun, but I think you do a very good job with the motivations of all the characters in this book. I mean, it isn't, you know, I mean, it's not a simple read, and it's certainly not, it's hard to explain. I mean, actually, there isn't really any good way to explain this book, which is sort of what I've been grasping with. So I'm going to come back to what I said. It's the voice, and it is the pacing, and it is the fact that it has an absolutely fabulous conclusion, which makes perfect sense. So that's all I can say. Patrick, come and join us before I say too much and ruin this experience for people.
Bring your guitar.
It's gotten dark in Gotham over there.
Yeah. Wait, I'm looking for the bat signal, and then I have to go. No, go ahead. I am in Gotham. Go ahead.
Let's see. So Renee would like to know, she says, Marshall, did you always write short chapters, or did you start from writing with James Patterson?
Oh no. Great question. Well, I started in advertising, so I wrote 30-second commercials, and that's not easy to get, the voice down. But I think I learned from Jim to write shorter chat. I learned from Jim Patterson before I started working for him. I knew him. I worked for him in the advertising business. Um, I did ads for him. And when I first came up with the idea I read um, Along Came a Spider in manuscript form. He was creative director of an advertising, and I said, Jim, I think you can quit your day job. This is, and so it's a great question, but I think it's my natural. In real life, I talk too much and don't know where to land. My wife is going, land the plane, land the plane. But because my attention span isn't that great, I want to get the chapter done with. And Jim just reinforced it. Jim once said to me, I used to live across the street from a guy who was, Al Haig. He was Secretary of State. He said, if I walked out my door and I saw Al Haig's body sprawled on the lawn, all bloody, I'm not going to describe the flowers. I go, okay. There's a lot of stuff in books that people don't need. You need enough color. The first 50 pages of The Rabbit Factory I showed to my editor. She goes, well, what is he wearing? What does he look like? What does the house look like? And I thought, like, oh, hair and makeup will take care of that. Wardrobe lady will take care of that. The location scout will take. So I realized that authors have to create the picture, but don't waste too much time. Thank you, Renee. Really good question. A really long answer. I hope I answered it. Tell her to wave if I did.
Um, Barbara, if memory serves, didn't Clive Cussler start out in advertising as well?
He did. Every time I saw Clive for the 30 some years that we were together, his most famous jingle would go through my head because I remembered it when I was a kid. Ajax, the foaming cleanser, floats the dirt right down the drain. That was Clive. Yes, I think until his 40s, he was in advertising. Dorothy Sayers was in advertising. Her book Murder Must Advertise, in fact, takes place in an advertising agency. Tim Malini,
Oh yeah.
it's a wonderful author in advertising. So, I think it's great prep, just like being a reporter is very good for some authors, being a lawyer. And when I was talking to Adam Plantinga on Friday night, he is still a policeman in San Francisco. And so, it's all great material, right? People like that just absorb material.
If you have a minute for my story, I went into advertising. I was a writer. I went to in high school. My high school yearbook says "Good luck in dental school," which is fortunately for people. I have all the dexterity of a drunken monkey. So luckily, I didn't go. I fell in love with the student newspaper, when I left, when I was in college in the Army, and when I got out of the Army, I wound up in an advertising agency, and I loved it. But the punishment for being a really good writer in the advertising business is to promote you and promote you and promote you. And suddenly you are running an agency. You're wearing suits, you're going to meetings, you're on planes, and they don't want you to write. They want you to and I supervise a department of 100 people. And somewhere around my late 30s, the first midlife crisis, it was like, is this all there is? I'm a writer, and now I'm an administrator. It's like doctors who become head of hospital and they don't get to deal with patients or go into the operating room. And I said, I want to I want to be able to write. And by the time I was 40, I had written a play, and within a few years, that was picked up by a television, by CBS, and suddenly I was in Los Angeles writing sitcoms. So a lot of times it's not so much that, hey, that guy was a writer in advertising. It's just he was a writer trying to get out of advertising, and I would bet you that guys like Clive Cussler always knew where they were going. It just took a while to get there.
Yeah, but I think that advertising can hone your use of language and can give you concepts and various things, so
It certainly did back in my day. It's getting more difficult. I mean, certainly the British explosion, the Brits were brilliant at advertising. I mean, they're brilliant at a lot of things,
right.
but uh, yeah, it was great training ground. And along the way, you also learn to think like your target audience. I was president of my own company, and I'd go into a meeting, and everybody say, "Hey, I'm the executive vice president in charge of, I'm the worldwide international." I go, "Hey, I'm Marshall, and I'm the conscience of your consumer." And they go, "Oh, yeah." I go, "No, no, you're not. I am not trying to sell the consumer something. I'm trying to find out what she could possibly like about this. There's a big difference." And so I think the reader's always in my head and in my heart when I'm writing a book. I want the reader to either love or hate my character, whatever, but I want the reader to feel that the character's real. I keep going back to, like, it's Patterson doesn't write characters, and we're very different writers. Um, and I want that's he's a great storyteller. You pitch him 3 words and he'll give you a concept for a book. I'm like, what makes this person tick? Why would I want to spend 12 hours, well, in Barbara's case, 46 minutes reading about this character? If you don't love the character, um, you don't care if they're trying to save the nation, or it doesn't matter. It's who do you, when I talk about predictable emotional experience of seeing the same, have you ever noticed that there's some friends that you want to go out with all the time, and then the rest are what the New York Times call medium friends? They're like, yeah, I know them, but I still want to go out with you know Barbara and Bill, with whoever, so Patrick, and it's just the way it is. I love creating real people. And in Maggie's case, I didn't create her. She just came into my head, and we worked it out together.
Well, you did a marvelous job, that's for
Well,
sure.
thank you.
Are there any more questions?
Um, well, let's see. There was a question about the film version of this book. Is that in the works?
Uh, it is in my head. It is with people I work with, but certainly I actually did sell NYPD Red 7, my previous book, to Lionsgate, and then the writer's strike happened, and then nobody knew what was going on in the business. But tell me, I don't know, do you watch Netflix? Do you watch streaming series? So this is a natural for I want to see the next episode, the next episode, the next episode.
Yep.
And it's not in the works, but ask whoever asked that if they happen to have 80, $90 million, because we could talk. You could give them my cell phone number, actually, if that's the case.
Sounds
They
wonderful.
probably, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Marshall. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you.
Hey,
We do have autographed copies of the book at the store. The people who belong to our crime subscription club, you will get your copy with free shipping, which is one of the reasons to belong to those clubs in June. So you'll just have to wait a while, but everybody else can grab it now. So thank you so much. What?
Here's one more question that's just come
Okay.
in. Danny asks, will there be an NYPD Red #8?
well, that's a timely question because the answer is yes, yes, yes. I just handed it in, and I'm happy to sign copies. It will be out November 8th, no, November 25th of this year. And I wrote the first NYPD Red series, the first six for Patterson. Yes, his brand's on it. But I wrote those books within the Patterson structure. When I wrote NYPD Red 7, it was just like a whole different experience. And I created a new character in there that everybody wants to know what's happening to Theo. You can, you can pick up the book at any. I try to write a book so that's like watching any episode of Law and Order. So NYPD Red 8 colon the 1159 bomber is the title, and the tagline on the front of the book says it's 11:59 and the city that never sleeps is afraid to get out of bed. And it's about a bomber who sets off a bomb in chapter 1 at 11:59 in a crowded subway station. And then the next day, another bomb, 11:59, a different place. I won't tell you where, but an iconic New York place. And now people know when the next bomb is going off. They don't know where. And that paralyzes the city. Nobody wants to go shopping. Nobody wants to come to work. Restaurants close. And that's one of my crazier villains. He has a good reason for it. He's not just psycho. He has a good reason for wanting to get even with the city. Is it too early to promote NYPD Red 8, the 11:59 bomber?
At all.
I promise you it won't read like a Patterson book. It will read like a Marshall Karp book. I
Very
will
good.
send
Do
you
you
an
and
early.
Jim do many events together?
Say that again?
I was just going to say, do you and Jim do very many events together?
No, we never did, and we don't work together anymore. We had a happy passing of the torch. We never did events together. Um, Jim doesn't need his. Does Santa do events with his elves?
Well,
Do you even know the names of any of his elves?
um,
Santa's the guy in the red suit. He brings the toys. Come on. Is
well,
that
Jim's
is
been
that
to see us a few times, and he does.
Jim is Jim is amazing. Jim doesn't need any help.
No, but he does enjoy getting out and talking to fans, and when it
Oh,
works out, he does.
absolutely, absolutely. No, he does. And look, I learned a lot from Jim. I really did. I learned a lot about the business. I learned a lot about writing for people. And one of the most important things he taught me when he read my very first sex scene, the very first book I wrote for him, he goes, "You got to make this scene work for women. It's You sound like a man wrote the scene." I said, "And you sound like my wife." But I rewrote the scene, and he's right. And it's all about understanding who your audience is.
Right.
So,
Well, hey, that's very
so
wise, Marshall.
thank Danny for asking that question. November 25th.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you, Danny. Indeed. Thank you, everybody who spent time with us this afternoon or this evening. enjoy the rest of your time tonight. Try to find a good book. Right? Bye.
And my pleasure.
Congrats, Marshall. Good to see you.
Thank you, Marshall.
All right.